Duolingo and apps in general don't work for the vast majority of people. And here in this video, I'm going to tell you why. So when it comes to learning a language, there's the idea of passive recall versus active recall, right? Passive recall would be where you can look at the word, you can read a book, and you can be like, I understand or I recognize this word, right? You have this happen a lot in Spanish because there's lots of words that are similar to words in English that we can start to pick up on patterns and link together, right? So like, whereas you might be able to read an article about whatever and you more or less can get the gist, right? Then if you had to have a conversation and use those words that you looked at even just 5 minutes ago, you wouldn't be able to do it because you don't have the practice with the active recall portion of it, right? And in order to get good at active recall, you have to do just that, be active with it and use it. You have to force yourself to go out and have conversations, right? And use those words, right? It does no good to just sit and study words and try and memorize them because this isn't a chemistry test, right? We are trying to be able to use the language, right? And so in order to get better at that aspect, you have to go out and use it, right? Another reason that apps are super terrible is that for the most part, the grammar explanations are terrible, right? Duolingo, for example, basically doesn't give you any explanation of what is going on. It's built around this style or this approach to just absorb the language as if you were a baby, right? Well, that approach would work if you wanted to wait 3 years, because what most kids take 3 years of listening to English all the time in order to be able to speak. So if you want to have to wait for 3 years in order to speak the language, by all means, go ahead and use Duolingo, right? But if you want to actually make some progress in the language, you need the grammar explained in a very digestible way, right? Not just the rules, right? Of this is the present tense and we conjugate it this way and whatever, right? But you also need to have the situations in which it's going to pop up be laid out in front of you, right? So for example, the present tense, right? You might learn the present tense in a class, right? And they're like, oh, you get rid of the AR, ER, IR, and you add the endings, and that's where we get the present tense, right? But if you're not being explained to the reason why you're using the present tense, right? To talk about just like basic facts, the tree is green, the man is tall, the dog is funny, right? Or to talk about routines in combination with days, right? I swim on Mondays. I play pickleball on Tuesdays. I walk the dog in the morning, right? Combining it with times to give routines. By the way, those are the two uses of the present tense, is for talking about just basic facts and descriptions, right? The dog runs fast. The man sleeps a lot. Or to talk about routines. The dog runs on Thursdays. The man sleeps on the man sleeps all night long, right? Something like that, right? You have to understand the reasons behind when we're going to use it, right? One of the big ones is the preterite versus the imperfect, right? This was one that confuses a lot of people because we don't make this distinction in English between something that happened routinely multiple times in the past or something that happened one time, right? So it doesn't really do much good if you go out and learn all of the conjugations. And other conjugations. It doesn't do much good if you go out and learn all the conjugations, but you don't know actually when to use which tense, right? For example, the preterite, if you've only done it one time, if I can put a date on it, whether it's explicitly mentioned or not, well, that's the preterite. If it's something that the present tense, if we're going back to it, right? Routines, right? If you're taking something that would be normally a routine in the present, I swim on Thursdays, and you want to put that in the past, well, that is the imperfect. That's where the imperfect comes in, when there's that repetition, right? When something happened multiple times. And for us, in English, the only way we make that difference is through words. I visited my grandma last weekend, or I visited my grandma every summer, right? For us, it's the same word, but in Spanish, it's two different tenses, right? And so unless you understand the distinction between those ideas, even knowing all the conjugations, you can sit there and memorize all the tables and whatever else, you're not gonna be able to actually use it until you understand that idea, right? Another thing that I think is huge, and I think that apps really mess up, is they try and hit you with all the information all at the same time when you start to learn a new idea, right? So you're learning the preterite, that first past tense, right? And they're gonna hit you with the full conjugation list, all the verbs, No, that's a terrible way to do it. For one, we need to limit it to words we already feel super comfortable with, right? So for example, in the course I teach, we go through and I have a list that I work through of verbs, right? So in the beginning, the first month we learn 20 verbs. And then the second month we use those 20 verbs in new situations, right? And we also learn 20 new more verbs, right? And go on, keep adding up more and more each time, right? With the idea that we're always going back to use those words in new situations, right? We're using them in new and creative ways, whether that is, for example, once everybody learns the preterite, my favorite question to ask is, what did you do this weekend? Right? Or what did you do this week? Right? And even though that's a terribly boring question after 4 weeks, right? What it is it's like discovering a river, right? You go down the first time and maybe you just go from point A to point B along the river, right? The second time, well, maybe you notice a little creek. You go off and explore the creek and then you come back, right? And then maybe the next time you go down a couple of different creeks, right? Maybe you find a new river, right? Or a new side that connects, right? That when it comes to language, I mean, start talking about just the basics of what you did. I went here, I visited my friends, I played with the dog, I played soccer, whatever, right? And then maybe the next time you add a few more details. I played soccer with my friends, and then you connect it, right? And then we went for food, right? After we had food, we did this. Then on Sunday, I did that, right? And you just go about adding in more and more details, right? Being more and more detailed. And it also helps to have a teacher who's going to ask questions that are going to bring out those details, right? So, for example, especially when you're like in private classes, right? The teacher kind of knows you, knows your level. So they can kind of push and antagonize and be like, okay, so you went with friends. What did you do after? Okay. What was the place called? Right. And just trying to get more details out of you and get that extra practice in with the conversation. Right. Because again, you're not going to get good at conversation unless you actually converse. Right. And so one of the things I really like to do is limit it. Right. So at first, we're going to learn how this idea works with yo so that I can start talking about myself. I can tell you what I did last weekend. I can tell you where I went. I can tell you who I was with, everything else, right? Then we're going to get into the to conjugation, right? Because that's going to allow us to have questions and we can start using this idea in conversation, right? It's not just something we're looking at on paper. It's something we can actually go out and ask questions and give answers, and we know how that changes, right? From there, we'll move into el, ella, and nosotros, right? So that we can talk ourselves, right? We'll include others in our group, right? And then el, ella, because it's kind of one, right? El, and then ellos as well. I kind of do together because we're talking about other people. Therefore, we don't have to change any of the conjugations, right? It's the same thing. So like if, for example, somebody asks like, donde nada el hombre, where does the man swim? Well, we don't have to worry about changing the verb. We just have to change the order a little bit. El hombre nada en el mar, right? The man swims in the ocean, right? And it makes it a lot easier, right? Yeah, in conclusion, apps suck. I don't really care whether it's Duolingo. If it's LinkQ is probably one of my favorites. I'm not going to lie. Shout out to Steve Kaufman. If you are going to use one, I think that one's great. But like Babbel or any of the other crappy, basically interactive flashcard apps like that, I highly recommend that you don't use them ever again. If you really want to learn vocab, if it's just for vocab, I think Duolingo is great, right? But the grammar explanations are going to be terrible, right? I would suggest my course. I think it's awesome, obviously. Now, if you want some like free help and you're kind of in intermediate stage and you want to deal with a specific area, if you go to SpanishDig.com, they also have some great resources, right? Be sure to comment below what you're struggling with recently in Spanish so that I can, or learning any language. I'm trying to learn Japanese, so if you got any tips on that, be sure to let me know. And I'll be sure to make another video about it. Adios.